Welcome back, everybody, to the Nozzlehead Notes Podcast. Brady Kapler, Jared Roskamp here today, and we're going to be joined by a special guest. Also today, we're going to be talking about some weed emergence issues, our field updates, and then our special guest from up north will be with us. So stay tuned. All right, Jared, here we are, another episode. These things are clicking along, so I'm glad to see we're continuing to get them out here. Hopefully you, the listener, are finding these useful. Today, we're in a situation where, we talk about Mother Nature and everything else like that. Things change. So, Jared, what's your weather conditions like?
We had a pretty good stretch in some of my areas. We got a little bit of planting done. We've seen some beans go in the ground. Actually have some beans up in some areas. Obviously got corn coming up where it got planted early on, but everybody's got the brakes back on here again this week as it's raining yet again. So we're again continuing to be wet down here. Probably unlike you guys. How you doing along? Did you finally get some rain?
We finally got some rain, and we've gone from a situation, and it's not the drought is not over from the standpoint, but it was a very welcome rain for a lot of areas. We're talking places that got their first measurable rainfall over an inch since 2021. They're looking at the fall of 2021. So this was a very welcome rainfall that we've got. As things typically go, it's feast or famine, and there are some spots that missed it. And there were spots that weren't that far from where we had a fire last week that ended up where the cell set on top and they ended up getting 5-6 inches of rain. Just craziness as far as the weather goes. So, and here in eastern Nebraska, where I'm currently at, we're probably approaching 3 inches over the last 3 days type of thing like that, because we've got enough rainfall with that. So welcome. We were very dry, and we'll take it. Never want to complain about it. Nothing came too torrential or gully washing type of thing like that. So I think a lot of the crops are soaking this up. The ground was very thirsty for it. So should be good. We have no corn up that I have seen yet. There may be some, but I have not seen anything up, or beans for that matter. Temperature's pretty cool. Yesterday we were in the mid 40s. Today we're going to be in the mid 50s. So soil temp's still staying down there. So we may have a little bit yet.
Yeah, and I think that kind of transitions right into one of the things I'm getting calls on this morning, Brady, is weed emergence is really starting to pick up, especially on the summer annual side south on my geography down here. I'm seeing a lot of giant ragweeds, which are some of the first ones to really come up for the summer annuals. A little bit of lamb's quarters and some of those starting to pop up, giant foxtail. But I have not yet seen any water hemp. And I'm not saying that it's not out there, but I wouldn't expect it quite yet. Back to the point of, if we think about weed emergence, just as a quick note here, we often can correlate some of those to growing degree days. And I think some of these growing degree calculators are maybe overestimating just a little bit, because we've had some warm days, but our soil temps have been cool. And really, when you think about seed environment, the GDDs are probably just a touch less. They're probably not wildly off, but if you guys are tracking GDDs looking for water hemp emergence, we're probably not quite there yet, but we're getting close. So I guess just the one thing, because I'm getting a lot of calls on it, that I want to call out is, don't let our guard down, keep our eyes out for water hemp, but it's probably still a touch on the early side, at least. And that may be a little bit of good news, as we still got quite a bit of spraying to get done, at least in my geography.
Well, that's a great point, Jared, because I was pulling up some, weather reports the other day, and I remember looking at the growing degree days, and I was like, no way. I can't believe that. And like you said, we've had some warm days, but I don't know that the soil temperatures support that. So I don't know what the official calculation is that can correlate that a little bit more than how growing degree days are typically calculated. But to me, there seems to be, I'm with you, the soil temps I don't think have caught up. And so I think we've got a little bit of overestimation there. We have not seen any palmer or water hemp either at this point in time. I did notice just around the countryside, probably this week, with a little bit of moisture, and we've gotten some more weeds popping now. They've actually germinated type of thing. So even lawns and grass and other things are growing now because they've just got that drink of water they needed. So
and then they'll take off like a rocket if we get warm, like we're supposed to after this rainy spell, I'm sure.
Exactly. If they're talking next week, we're going to hit the high. We've got several days in the 80s. Things are going to explode. Crops and weeds as well, yeah. which will make a challenge, because as we always talk about, that challenge of keeping up with the chasing the planters and then keeping up and getting ahead of these crops before emerging, like we talked last week.
Yeah, and I think that's the other question I've been getting is everybody's trying to find these little gaps to really keep up with these planters, because we got somewhat of a large number of acres in my area that's a naked crop with no herbicide on it, which are going to get priority. So again, really quickly to transition, so we got some time for our guest here today. The other comment I wanted to talk about that I'm getting questions on is I got it rained out of a field. You got a sprayer half full of something. What would you do with it? Most herbicides, I guess I want to say, especially ours, are very stable. Even after you mix them, I don't really have to worry about degradation, especially if we're going to spray it out in the next week or two. But probably the biggest thing to watch for is that settling out in the tank, especially if you got an atrazine in there. So getting out and turning that sprayer on and running the agitation in the pumps is very important to cycle that load at least daily. And maybe you've got better advice on frequency, but I've always told people daily and been, pretty good at getting along with that.
No, I think I'm there. I would say that this is one of those things that we, at least daily. You can do it more often if you've got a mix you're really worried about. As we've talked, we've covered in the past, fertilizers are challenging at times. But the most important thing is you cannot assume that if that sprayer sits for any period of time, and when I say any period of time, I'm talking hours type of thing, that it's just automatically there. You've got to spend time and know what your pump capacity is, right? So how long it takes you to turn that load over. If your pump is a 40 gallon per minute pump and you've got a 400 gallon tank there, it's going to take you 10 minutes to turn that over at a minimum. And then I usually like to double that, because then I want to make sure I'm mixing it good type of thing. I'm a big advocate for that. And I would say you're probably spot on when I tell guys, hey, start it up. Even if it's sitting in the shed, you can spin it up and get that stuff mixed, because you really don't want that settling in lines and everything else like that. And it's one of those things I tell guys too, that if you think you're only going to be able to go out and spray 10 minutes, you're probably better leaving your lines clear and just your tank full, so you can turn that tank, than you are getting 10 minutes worth of spraying done before it rains.
And another great point on that, Brady, is since I just looking at the weather pattern I got this week, 3-4 days of rain in a row, there's no way we're going to get much spraying done through most of my geography. If you got a sprayer with stuff in it, it might be worth trying to get those booms full of water and flushing them out, even if you got stuff in the tank. I don't know, depends on your plumbing or your sprayer whether you can do that or not. But getting that chemical and basically those atrazine type products that like to settle, not letting them settle and hang out in a boom for a week is really important. So if possible, it may be important to flush that out. And even if you can get that mix off the sprayer and into something else, depending on how much you have, those are all tactics you can use to help from having hang-ups in the sprayer. Frankly, if we had a little atrazine hung up, we're still spraying so much corn, it may not be the end of the world. But as we get later in the season, we're going back and forth corn and beans, that will be a big deal. And even if you do wash, I guess the last thing I'll say is make sure you charge those booms. Take a second and get them good and charged and flushed before you start going through there. I don't know how many people out there have seen those hot spots where we take off. That happens occasionally field to field, but especially after a sprayer sits like this, it seems like it's when we have the most problems. So taking that extra minute to get that extra charge out of the booms before you get started will limit your exposure on those high doses.
Yep. No, I totally agree there. I think if you can get those booms clean is ideally, but the second thing is no matter what you do, when you're starting up, make sure you charge that boom, get it completely clean, and make sure all your nozzles are working. There's nothing plugged up, and you figure out the problem there. Really, the big point is the mix is that we just don't want a mess that you have to clean up, because if it sits too long, then it can't get back into solution. So if you keep it mixed up, I think you're on the right track.
I totally agree.
So. All right, I think our next segment here, that's going to transition us right into bringing in our next guest. All right, so joining us now, we have our first guest of the Nozzlehead Podcast, and that is Eric Schultz. Eric is a tech service rep in Minnesota, formerly was tech service rep in eastern Nebraska and western Iowa. So we wanted to bring Eric on, share some information with us, and let us know. Eric, how are things up in Minnesota? All the snow gone?
Well, funny thing about that, it's been gone for quite a while. We'll call it spring, has appeared to last for multiple, although warmed up at all. But thanks for having me on this week, guys. I appreciate being a part of it. And things up here in Minnesota in general, very quiet. There's a little bit of corn planted, a little bit of field activity. Some fertilizer's been done, some tillage. But all in all, the vast majority, the whole southern half of the state of Minnesota, not a lot of activity whatsoever. Soil temperatures have stayed cold. I think this week is going to be the main week that soil temperatures start warming up to somewhere close to 50. We've been sitting in the low 40s or even upper 30s for what seemed like the last 3-4 weeks. So we're finally getting there. I think planters will really be rolling by the end of this week. And then we're really going to have to turn our attention really quick to the next step in the growing season and what we have to do to protect what we put in the ground.
Well, as Jared and I said before, one of the things is that Mother Nature always bats last. So we get what we get. I mean, we've got all kinds of varying conditions as we've talked, and things change in a short period of time.
Yeah, and Eric, for our listeners that have never been to Minnesota or don't maybe appreciate all the northern geography that I'm so far from, I'm always impressed. You guys actually have a lot of corn and soybean acres up there. So, people that are listening to this, I think it's always something that we maybe have in the back of our head that, your guys' success really drives the markets and failures too, maybe more than we want to give it appreciation for down in more of the Corn Belt. So I always kind of like talking to you because you give some perspective on where you're at. And frankly, it always surprises me that you're really not that far behind us with push and planting. You guys really kind of get after it up there. So I'm glad to have you on for that perspective today. One thing though, that I want to kind of tap in today is your experience with Verdict, because you guys have got a lot of black dirt acres for corn that you guys have been successful with utilizing that product. So tell me a little bit about why you guys have had some success up there with that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's definitely a product that's proven itself over many years of performance. And number one, we also use it in soybeans at a lower rate too. But in corn, we utilize a lot of the flexibility of Verdict, from impregnating fertilizer to putting it out with liquid fertilizer as a carrier, which I think both of you guys could attest to that application. But then the third one, just putting it out broadcast applications on black dirt. We see it solving the worst of giant ragweed issues and water hemp issues, because we have heavy dirts up here. We're using a lot of 15 to 18 fluid ounces of Verdict, and it looks fantastic in any program, but we're really going after giant ragweed and then those bad water hemp acres.
And you guys use it a lot for residual. Back talking to black dirt, I mean, down here, and Brady, you give your perspective and twist on this, but we think of Verdict or the sharpened containing products for burn down, because I've got so much no-till, where you guys really drive the value of that residual of Verdict that I want to relay to people to hear about, because that's something I think that gets lost in the messaging when down here, at least, because we use it so much for burn down.
Yeah, as one of my previous colleagues told me, when it comes to southern Minnesota, there might be one or two no-till fields, but there's some more no-till fields than one or two in all of southern Minnesota. But you're exactly right. I mean, we're taking Sharpen and Outlook in Verdict, and we're putting it out on black dirt. We're only utilizing the residual power out of both. And I think a lot of everyone in crop protection knows what Outlook is capable as a residual product. But Sharpen, we kind of, sometimes that gets overlooked, that it's very powerful PPO from a residual standpoint, large seeded broadleafs and small seeded broadleafs.
I think that's too. I mean, right there, Eric, you hit it. The fact that Verdict comes in and gets both large seeded and small seeded, that gets way undersold, I guess, if I look at it how it is in the market, and people don't realize what an accomplishment that is from a herbicide standpoint, because we don't have a lot of residuals. I mean, we've got a lot of the group 15s that are really good on small seeded broadleaves, and they get grasses, but they don't do much for large seeded. And to have a herbicide that gets herbicide, atrazine is good on gets the large seeded, but kind of struggles sometimes with the small seeded. So I think, a lot of times we think, oh, well, it's just like another pre-product. It's just, atrazine replacement or something. No, it's not. It's actually a very unique product that gives us good activity when we're talking about both large seeded and small seeded broadleaves, and don't undersell large seeded broadleaves. I mean, Eric, you were talking about giant ragweed, velvet leaf sunflower. Those things can be very competitive, and, glyphosate's been good on them a long time, but we also know that there's just a lot of weed pressure out there, and this is a valuable piece to add.
Very true, and I think the other part of the Verdict conversation for us is that we can make it work with any post following it. Whether we're using some of the rates I mentioned, higher rates, we come back with a post a little bit later, and it might not have residual with it. It all depends upon what that acre's after. And between the application methods and the use rates up here, all on black dirt, I mean, Verdict offers a lot of flexibility as a pre-emerge.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point that I want to emphasize here. You and I are similar in a way that we're going to see planting really take off. I think you mentioned it earlier, and these planters are going to get going. One downside to Verdict is it's got to be on there before that corn or soybeans come up, right? So especially on the corn acre where we're pushing those rates, I tell my guys to get out early and use that residual. I mean, I'm sure you guys have a similar message up there as well.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, there's a lot of people up here accustomed to what 15, 16 ounces of Verdict does for them. So there are no really hesitation with getting it out early and getting it on. And that's going to be what we turn our attention to next. And as you mentioned, I mean, we're going to have to try and keep up with corn planters with pre-emerge applications. I mean, missing out on a Verdict application, that's a position you don't want to be in when it comes to the weed spectrum that we're going after up here.
And I think we talked about that a little bit last week too, Jared, on how we want to make sure we're prioritizing things. And when we talk about the Kickstore brand products, those are all going to have to be on before the crop emerges. Question I had, I'll kind of weave this in here, is that just yesterday, hey, how far, like with beans, if I'm putting a Kickstore product on, when do I need to be watching out as far as that emergence or whatever? My answer, and I want your guys' opinion on this, my answer was, if there's any green material that the sprayer can come in contact with or the spray can come in contact with, then don't do it. And that's kind of an untechnical answer, but it's really what I would call the simplest answer to make sure they understand it.
I would agree, Brady. I think, basically if you're following the planter with it or you're a day after the planter, your risk is pretty low about getting exposure. But every day you wait past that is more than you need to get out of that sprayer and check for that green tissue. As long as it's under the ground, I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, we had a retailer that was saying, well, hey, you need to wait such certain depth below the soil surface. And I'm like, nah, it's really more simple than that. If there's green material that it can contact, then that's probably what I would not be spraying. If there isn't green material for it to contact, then that. The interesting thing about beans is, and I've seen this happen, and you guys probably have too, that can change during the day. You can start the day out and there's nothing there. And so you need to be checking each field as you go to it, not just assume that one field is there, because I've seen where the fields were sprayed in the morning, they weren't emerging or cracking. By the end of the day, they were. And so as you mentioned it, we get drier, we get some temperatures, we get some heat. They're calling for some heat for us next week. These things could really take off.
Yeah, and Brady, you're exactly right, because it gets to the point where they can't just assume that the crop hasn't started to emerge or break through that soil surface. So especially as we're pushing the timing between planting all of these acres, and we're going to have tons of corn and soybean acres going in the ground at the same time, and then coming back with the pre's. I like how you put that, if there's any green material. But yeah, they cannot assume that they've got the opportunity or they've got the window. So.
And I suppose I should clarify, that's green crop material. I mean, obviously, for spraying weeds, it seems simple, but I better clarify that.
That's a great point. And kind of just reiterate lastly, be proactive, use that residual, because, the biggest window for these products on the front end before you start planting, and then we run out. So again, if we got opportunities to get out there, let's get out there with Verdict and these other sharpened products. Just kind of wrap that up. We're kind of running up on time here, Eric. So I guess to kind of throw it back to you real quick, any parting advice here as we go into spring that you'd like to tell your team or anybody, that you've been in the business long enough, things that you try and keep top of mind, just to a last kind of parting note here?
Yeah, I think it's going to go quick in between now and Memorial Day, and I think everyone within the industry sees that, and it happens, ebbs and flows by year. But I just say that, number one, I like to think of what's the next step, not to take the attention off of what we're doing now, but it might take 5 minutes to just, assess, where is this going to go? What's this going to look like in 2 weeks? Because you put yourself there, it may help you with where you're at currently. So I'd say that.
That's an excellent point, Eric. Memorial Day is a big marker for people. And, if you look at your calendar, that was 4 weeks from yesterday is Memorial Day. And you think about where your crops typically are, that's a lot that's got to happen in 4 weeks. Eric?
Well, we hopefully we're on the lake by the 4th of July up here. Who knows?
Well, maybe the ice will be gone. All right. Eric, hey, great having you on. We will have you back on, and we appreciate your time. Guys, that's all the time we have from myself and Jared and Eric. We appreciate you listening. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.